My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Srisankaran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue with Mahan's 11th principle, um, the cycle of life and how the symbiotic relationship between us and everything in this universe. And to understand this flow, uh, we see that, the great saints and sages see the harmony with nature, harmony with the universe. And part of this nature is birth, sustenance for a short while, and then dissolution. And there's a cycle that we are all, everything from the energy, potential energy, to the dynamic energy, which we call in science kinetic energy, atoms, molecules, more complex things, the sun, the earth, the galaxies, everything on earth goes through this cycle. Even you see that we have a star is born and then it sustains for a while, it dissolves, right? And all this cycle is part and parcel of our being, everything that is in this universe. And in that process of accumulation, sustenance, and dissolution, we see that that accumulative process, that means we are harnessing all the energy from the universe to create a quantum or small packet of information and knowledge and energy that sustains for a while and then dissolves. And you see that even our own body, prior to existence, it was in a state of, there was no material body. And then by chance, we see that, the fertilization takes place, and then there is harnessing of energy. And you see that the process of meiosis and mitosis takes place, and replication. It's pulling all the energy from, the environment. And ultimately, you see form taking place. And then you see that, to sustain that form, there's need of energy. The energy is converted into, physical forms and various other things. And see that process we see is that this food chain energy flow, the cycle, right? And one needs to understand this, that we are part and parcel of this, continuously evolving, transforming, universe that we live in. And this is the 11th principle that Swamiji speaks about. But prior to that, let me just summarize what Swamiji's principles, so that we understand. So we need to understand what the 10th principle is. And I spoke extensively on the origin of life. And here Swamiji speaks about the 9 great principles of God. That means that which created, manifested everything. So here Swamiji speaks about, the 9 great principles that we covered over the last few satsangs. From, if you go back to the clip, YouTube clip number 1, you will see. So we covered this, that, the principle, how God exists, the potential energy. We covered extensively that as thought, an all-pervasive consciousness, that intelligence that gave rise to this manifestive power, the power to create, the power to sustain, the power to dissolve everything and then start recreation again. We spoke about the third important principle of sound, how speedy sound. Sound is very important vibration. We spoke about light and heat and the suns, why sun is really important. By the way, we are all solar beings. Huh? The sun is, imprinted in all of us, atoms, in our molecules, in our, so we carry with us that sun, that is powering everything in this universe. So you see that, we spoke about light and heat and sun, the ethereal sphere of atoms. We spoke about atoms, what atoms constitute, what are the building blocks of atom, and how water, earth, air, and fire. So we spoke about these 9 great principles of Mahan in fairly in depth. And then Swamiji goes down to, explaining that, 2 of the 9 forces can be caught or cognized by the hand. And then he goes on. So he's giving the characteristics of this. We covered all this in the previous satsangs. Then he spoke about how some of it we cannot catch by our hands, but we can perceive with our senses. That is sound and sun, the heat and light and atoms, air. We cannot catch air, but we can sense air. The same thing with fire. We can feel the heat of the fire. So again, when we rub our hands, we feel heat. And what we see is that the molecules are vibrating at a faster speed, and that gives us heat. So we see that out of the 9 important principles, 2 we can catch it, or we can cognize, we can sense it with our hands, and 5 we can perceive it with the other sensory perceptions. But we see that the potential energy, or the I that we talk about, and the consciousness can only be cognized by our intellect. And this is where we see that for us to realize our own consciousness, we need to have an inward exploration. For us to cognize that I, that the primordial DNA in us that emanates, that gives rise to the consciousness and everything else, also requires a pursuit of jnana, not an empirical, object-wise search, but an inward, spiritual search, a search that is neither matter nor energy. So here Swamiji speaks about that these 9 great principles and the mode of knowing this, or cognizing this, or being aware of this. And so here, this gives us the kind of understanding of what's forms. We see that earth and water has form. Many of it has formless. So within us, within our own biology, there is form, and there is also formless. And if we try to use form to try to capture formless, we find it challenging. So this is why we see that the concept of God, which is formless, dimensionless, colorless, for the mind to understand this, a mind that is so oriented to the material world, find it difficult to cognize this. So we have created this formless, dimensionless, infinite gods into forms that gives representation of this formless in some way. Like, for example, we have gods for fire, earth, space, and a whole range of things. So we see that these 9 principles can be described, can have characteristics on both the form and formless. In that same way, it describes us that there is a part of us that is formed body, and there is a formless body. Then Swamiji goes on to speak about the 5 small principles of God. So here he now goes into the biological entities, the living beings. So here he says that God exists, and this is where the evolutionary ideas are very important, that we covered as living, beings living in water, vegetation, those who crawl and creep, your insects. And then we have the mammals that walk and move like animals, quadrupeds, your dogs and cats, and also birds. So here he's describing all these living organisms on this material world. And all of them, if you see, all of them depend very much on the 9 principles. All of them have this imprint of that 9 important, principles that Swamiji spoke about. What is really interesting is that if you see, we human beings as Homo sapiens, we have an element of all of this in us, right? So if you see, our origin starts off in water, and the whole fertilization process takes place in the nectar, and we see that a lot of the minerals in all this vegetation builds our body, our brain, our mind. And we see that, the crawling and the creeping, if you see a child, when a child is first born, before it starts walking, it starts crawling and creeping, start flipping and so on. So we see that elements of that is built in our DNA. And then we see that, in us, most of us start off walking with our hands and legs, and then eventually we learn to stand up and walk. But you may ask this question, yes, the first four is true, but what about birds? You see, yes, we human beings cannot fly, but we have the ingenuity, we have the creativity to fly like a bird. And this is where what is impossible, the human mind is able to create things that enable us to fly. We have helicopters, we have aeroplanes and all those things. So even though the physical body cannot do it, our intellect is able to bridge that gap to enable us to fly, and even sometimes higher than what most of the birds can fly. So again, we see that what's amazing is that the biological evolution is there, but within our own DNA, all of this is imprinted in us. So all these five appear and perish. They are born, they sustain for a while, and then they dissolve. As they dissolve, we see that some of them become food for others. While living, they eat other beings, either from the water, the vegetations, or insects, or other things. So we see this evolution that takes place, that symbiotic relationship within the biological. And nature doesn't waste anything. Every waste is dissolved into something that is of meaning. So we see this part of this, evolution that Swamiji spoke about. And that brings us very nicely to the 11th principle, that how everything is interrelated. The vehicle and the food for atoms are atoms themselves, right? One atom collides to create something new. One atom merges. So this is what we call in physics as fusion. Things come together, they create intensive energy, and then they have fission, which is multiplicity. In that same way, we see that, when, procreation takes place, we see that, when male and female come together, we have an exchange of, the DNA, the atoms come together, and you see there's a fusion that takes place that forms that key element that fuses to create that life. So the entire universe starts off with the primordial and then expands. That imprint is not just in our universe, but across in all our galaxies, in our Earth, in our sun, including in our own biology. So a part of the universe, we see a part of the DNA of the universe is imprinted in us, right? And we see, as Swamiji mentions, the vehicle, that means the Earth, and everything on the Earth are vehicles. That means ways to communicate, ways to exchange, ways to have that symbiotic relationship between sustaining and also learning from one another. So again, this relationship is so important, and this is a very important harmonious relationship that nature has inbuilt in us. So we see this cycle of food, right? So we see that we start off with vegetation. We see that the grasshopper eats the vegetation, and then the frogs eat the grasshopper, the snakes eat the frogs, and then the eagle eats, the snake. And you see that the eagle's droppings, all those things as important fertilizers and important chemicals that give rise to mushrooms and so on. So we see this symbiotic relationship that, and of course, human beings and others eat it, and that cycle continues. So here you see that for a short moment, it exists, it's, sustains from other things, and then other things utilize it when it dies, and the cycle continues. So what Swamiji then says here is that so he's capturing this nature cycle in a very interesting way. Say, earth some days ago, so it was the earth. Then grass, from earth emerged grass, shrubs, trees 3 days ago. So if you put the earth together and you see that within 3 days with proper condition, you see that something starts growing from it. And you start seeing, say, living things in 2 days. So, with immediately when you see, grass and so on, you have living beings. And from there emerges, from that grass and shrubs, animals feed off it. And you start getting meat, milk, vegetables, fruits, and it generates 6 different types of taste, right? And you see that we human beings have 6 different types of taste, right? And I'm sure all of you all know those 6 tastes, right? It comes from the variety of things that nature has provided all of us. So we see that, and why the taste is really important is that the taste is what entices us to acquire that minerals, acquire that, uh, that is much needed minerals to build the body. So for example, sometimes when our sugar level drops, immediately we start craving for something sweet, or, food, or something, that, and we see that the sugar is very important for the body. And the other important thing is, why do we crave for salt? Is because salt is very important for the body, because it enables, the chemical to, it's an important way of transmitting various molecules and things. So body needs salt. If you don't have salt, you see that the flow of information within our nerves and our neural pathway becomes disrupted, right? But if you have too much of that, also is a problem, right? If you have too much sugar, too much salt, also is a problem. But something very interesting happens, that when the body doesn't have enough, it starts craving, and the senses, because of the 6 tastes, it knows that, I need more of this. So it triggers sense to the brain and say, look, I need to eat more, things with salt or sugar and so on. So we see that nature is inbuilt in all of us, and there's a conditioning that takes place, right? Similarly, we see that, as Swamiji says, the water, air, atoms today, short while ago, it was like water, air, atoms, but just a while ago. But now it is the I. So, we see all of this, as food and elements, and, but today it builds the human consciousness. It gives that existence. So what he's telling us is that the entire universe is part of us, and we are part of the universe. As what Jalaluddin Rumi and other great saints says, that we are not a drop in the ocean, but the ocean is a drop in us. And this is what Swamiji is trying to explain, that everything that we see is a manifestation of this universe. And everything that we integrate, digest, assimilate is the universe, or the I, or the infinite potential is in this form. It transforms to become the form itself. So he said, but now it is the I. So I manifests in these different forms. Ultimately, it's the same I. Similar to water, right? The pure water is H2O, but we call it coffee, we call it Milo, we call it different things, but the essence of it is still the base H2O. In that same way, the essence of everything is the I, but it exists as the earth, the grass, the shrubs, the trees, the animals that give us milk and meat and vegetables and fruits, and gives us that beautiful taste, but the taster itself is the same. So this is what Swamiji is showing, that interrelationship between, the I and this material universe. The nature of the material universe is actually about energy, and it's, energy in different forms, transforms, dissolves, and recreates. Here's another chart of the whole symbiotic relationship. And you see that it starts off with simple plants, plankton. And you see that the planktons, are small, creatures within the lake or river starts eating. And then you start seeing, fish and other things starts eating. And slowly, as you move up, you move up the value chain. Ultimately, the ones who are sitting on the highest value chain is the human beings, that has the variety of choices that they have. But what's really interesting is that even the humans, the Homo sapiens, when they die, right? Even while they're existing, I'm sure most of you all know, even in our body at the present moment, there are many microbes that thrive in us, you know, use us as an ecosystem to sustain themselves. If you look at our bowel, if you look at our intestine, if you look at our hair and many parts, if you use electron microscope, you see microbes, right? And the microbes overpopulate, then you start getting all kinds of rash and all those things. But it's kept in harmony by our white blood cells, which keeps it in check. But sometimes we really need those good microbes to digest food. So we see that, that this whole entire continuum, that there are microbes that live on us, there are microbes that we live off, the animals that we live off, the plants that we live off. And similarly, when we die, our body, if you bury the body will, decay and be dissolved on earth, and many things will eat and use it as a food. And for many Hindus that cremate, or many other religious funerals where they cremate, they take it and throw it into the ocean or throw it into a river or a lake. And you see that that becomes food for whatever the animals that are, or whatever, fish and, other things that are in the lake or the river or the sea, which will use that as a food. So we see this symbiotic relationship that Swamiji speaks about, which science speaks about. He says that one helping another, one becoming food for another, one mixing with another, is the nature of this world. All one thing, one act. So it's actually one intelligence that is imprinted in all of us. And one thing for certain, we know that while we are living, we come with nothing. We sustain for a while, we accumulate a lot of things, we accumulate a lot of wealth, a lot of name and prestige and all kinds of things, maybe even relationships and children and everything. At the end of the day, when we finish our journey here, we don't take anything with us, right? So the only thing that we leave behind is our experience, if we document it for others to know. But we don't take anything. We come with nothing, no thing, neither matter nor energy. We're not going to take any matter and energy with us too. So why all this fuss? Why all this inferiority complex or superiority complex? We should be having the samatva concept, or samatva complex, a complex of the whole idea of oneness. And this is what Swamiji is trying to convey in this. So we see that symbiotic relationship is so important. And it's about building that harmony in the ecosystem, right? A harmony in the ecosystem will lead to a harmonious life. If for whatever reason we disrupt the harmony, right? So for example, if we, the bees are very important. Without the bees, we would not have food. Without the bees, we would not have flowers. Without the bees, we would not have fruits. But suppose if we destroy the bees, so we would not have pollination taking place, we would not have beautiful flowers, we would not have fruits, we would not have vegetables, plants will all die. And ultimately, it comes back to lack of food and other things, and eventually it will have an impact on human life itself. So here's an example of how, as we disrupt nature, as we don't give consideration to the planetary health, if the health of the planet is not looked after, the health of human beings and everybody else is jeopardized. So a lot of my work today is actually about, sustainable development and planetary health aligned to Swamiji's teachings. But the harmony in the ecosystem can only come if the human mind is harmonious. If the human mind has that oneness, see nature as itself, ourselves, so that if we are part of nature and we stop harming, ourselves, we will stop harming nature. And this is why, in Swamiji's teaching, he says that the harmony of the human personality is very important. In that harmony, one attains oneness. In that oneness, one attains clarity of thought. In the clarity of thought, one understands oneself. one understands nature and one understands the relationship with oneself and nature, and how to look after nature and oneself in a natural way. And if we are able to do that, every day we wake up will be a blissful, inspirational, wonderful, nature-centric day. This is what, you breathe the air and you can feel nature. You close your eyes, you feel nature. When you're part of the world, you feel nature. You start seeing that, the plants speak to you. The animals convey their message. The people around you starts, you're able to understand and be one with everything. And this is what harmonious living is, that understanding the symbiotic relationship. That is why we close our eyes, not, we meditate, we put our eyes, quietly, and we meditate so that for a short moment, we slowly become one with that universe. And that's what meditation teaches us, the oneness, the universal personality that we are part of. We are, it's core to our DNA. We live it every day, and we are impacted by it every day. If we live it every day, we see that we experience that universal identity, the oneness, the harmony in universe within all of us. We don't have to search anywhere else. We don't have to go anywhere else. That harmonious life, the harmonious universal identity is inbuilt in our DNA. And this is what meditation is supposed to teach us. Sandosham.